Howdy, folks. I'm Mark, and today I'm joined by Nate McKeever of the Backlog Breakdown. Nate, thanks for joining me for this short talk about video games.
Hey, thanks for having me, man. And I will endeavor to be punchy. And
Oh, yes.
Like rabbit punchy, like quick.
Yes. After all, this is a quick play, which you are listening to, so let's get into it. So, Nate, you and I have kind of had a back and forth dialogue for like almost a year now, maybe, kind of in our own podcast and then on our own podcast together.
And just as friends, like we've had back
true.
and forth about Game Pass, just private correspondence.
Right.
So yeah.
And so most recently we had a chat on the breakdown and a bite size that was not very bite sized, but that was about kind of the studio closures and coming out of there. And now here we are again on Quick Play, which is probably sooner than each of us expected.
Yes. Yes. I will say that. Yes.
I wanted to cover two larger happenings that have happened. One being Xbox's actually pretty strong showing at Summer Game Fest happened, but more recently and kind of more significantly is the price hike and changes to Game Pass. To real quickly, as quick as I can, cover these changes. Start at the bookends, Game Pass Core, which was Xbox Live Gold up until last September, is functionally, that's paying to play online. Plus, you get a limited library of Game Pass games, about 30 at a time. They're all a little bit older. That's currently at $10 a month and is actually staying at $10 a month, but you could buy it for $60 for the year, and that's increasing to $75 for the year. On the other end of that is
makes zero sense to me. So that one's not going up at all?
Like unless you're paying for it annually, because it was like $5 a month on an annual basis. Now it's like $6.25 a month.
Okay,
but it's still $10 a month if you're paying month to month. Who knows?
Oh, okay. No, that does make sense. I was like, the math isn't mathing, but then I was like, oh, I'm just bad. I'm just bad with numbers. For some reason, I only thought there were 6 months in a year. So I'm tired. I'm coming off a vacation, man. So my brains aren't there.
And we're trying to understand the new Game Pass tiers, which is its own algebra. On the other end, Game Pass Ultimate is like the big kahuna where you get access to the full library of Game Pass, including games that are on day one, games that are through EA Play, and you can install them on Xbox or PC, or you can play them through cloud streaming. That's increasing from $17 a month to $20 a month, and it was $15 a month not too long ago. And then right in the middle is where it gets funky, where PC Game Pass is increasing from $10 to $12, which still includes the full library and day one releases. It doesn't include online because you don't need to pay for that on a computer. And then Xbox Console Game Pass Console, whatever it is functionally sunsetting. It was currently $11 a month for the full library, and you got day one games, but not anything EA Play. But it didn't include the online service. So if you're currently at that tier, you can keep it, but if you unsubscribe, you lose it because it's going away and it's being replaced.
So that was the main tier for the longest time. Yeah, the Game Pass Console thing, and the prices are going up on. Like there's a new iteration of that. Correct?
Yes. Okay. Yes. So that is now Game Pass Standard, which will be $15 a month, and does include online. So before it did not, now it does. But it does not include the day one releases. So any new games that will get added kind of case-by-case basis, probably 6 months or to a year after they release. Game Pass Ultimate still gets those kind of play it day one on Game Pass games, but not on Standard. So all this goes into effect September 12th, although apparently the Standard tier doesn't actually have a date set yet, but all the price increases go up.
Yeah, and I think what's also important to sort of note about this is that they are putting a cap on banking your time. I think it's only up to, is it 13 months now?
Yeah.
Whereas I think they were letting you bank up to 3 years prior to that. And so now what they're doing is so if you have in excess of that 13 months now, they're still letting you keep that balance, but you can no longer sort of like load up the account.
Right.
Which I mean, it just means like you do what a lot of people in those situations do is you buy when it's low, and then when you need a bit of a refill, you just go boop. And
it's also what I've been doing is like it would go on sale like 3 months at a time. Would go on sale like on Amazon or Target or something. And I'd buy those codes and just hang on to the codes. Like I have a notes app where just these are the codes I've added, these are the codes I haven't. Theoretically, those expire at some point. They don't tell you when, but you could maybe still do that for up to a few years.
I'm sure that they have like, a shelf life. I'm not sure if it, but yeah, it's like you just hold on to those codes. And then when you just need the bump, you go boop and you just pop in the numbers and away you go.
Exactly.
Yeah, dude, it's one of those things as somebody who has sort of griped about just that whole structuring, because ostensibly there's 5 different versions of Game Pass currently, because you have the Game Pass console and then standard are 2 different things, even though they're kind of the same thing. One is just like the grandfathered version of the other thing. And
they're trying to unplug.
Yeah, they're trying to just kind of like kill. But what is wild to me is that too is there's a couple things, and a lot of this isn't like any like that. The Game Pass standard is actually more expensive than PC Game Pass, which is kind of like, it's like, oh, you supported the console, so here's a big stinky like thumb, we're thumbing our nose at you, for kind of like it's
for buying your big box.
Yeah, it's like, you supported us. Well, that sucks for you. Not really. But but it's as somebody who like, and I I hang out in Sony land a lot more than I do other platforms right now.
Sure.
I have expressed just like frustration with even like the PS, what I have lovingly called plus, double plus, and triple plus. Like, it's just like, and everybody's like, tiers, this makes no sense. And I was like, oh, it's not that hard, but yeah, it's kind of dumb. And now I'm like, oh, like Microsoft is over here performing like arcane arts. That's all I'm saying. They've got like, some strange shamanistic rituals going on.
Yes.
Anyways.
Like in a way with all these changes, it's made Game Pass like at least just as confusing as PS Plus, where it's like,
I'd say more so.
Yeah. I mean, like there's still the benefit, like the leg up that Game Pass Ultimate at least still has above PS Plus is the day one stuff. But without that, like PS Plus was like kind of started as like this Game Pass competitor, and now it's probably better than actual Game Pass with this change, I feel like.
Well, so looking, PS Plus originally was sort of put up against Games with Gold. Just as a brief history lesson here, and Games with Gold, and actually PlayStation, if I'm remembering correctly, actually would give away games with the original version of PS Plus, which kind of forced Games with Gold, because Games with Gold didn't do that. Games with Gold or Gold, it used to be just like Xbox Live Gold, and that was what you needed to do like online stuff. And so eventually they sort of hit parity, and then Xbox did the Game Pass thing, and then Sony responded with PS Plus or Essential, and then PS Plus Extra and PS Plus Premium, which is just stupid. And Extra is like sort of like comparable to like Game Pass, as and Premium is just like, Premium is weird and messy. We're not here to talk about PS Plus though. But I mean, the current iteration of PS Plus is a response to Game Pass.
Right.
Yes.
And now I think Microsoft kind of looked at PS Plus and was like, they can do that? Like, let's just, like, we don't have to go too far. Yeah, it feels like they're trying to match, like they went down to match what PS Plus is doing in a sense.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, like I think there's, and I don't, we are trying to stay punchy.
Yeah.
But I think I think, to be honest, there was a time when Game Pass was probably seemed like an existential threat to Sony. Because it was all anybody was talking about for a while. And I think Sony has sort of done some of their own experimentation. They found a model that kind of works for them.
Yeah.
And I think they kind of hit a point where like, oh, we'll be fine. And they sort of found an equilibrium that works for them. Yeah. And I would say, like, honestly, like, I think the biggest problem is that, listen, Microsoft is a big company. I think it's like it's valued at like $3 or $4 trillion at this point in time, which is a lot. And anybody, like, listen, I think Sony's like 200 or 300 billion at this point in time, which is also a lot, but it is nowhere near the size of 3 or 4 trillion. That's orders of magnitude. Now, it's not to say that Xbox doesn't get.
They're not getting the trillions. Yeah.
They're not getting the trillions, but there's a much bigger war chest there, I think, for them to draw on. And I think this goes back to sort of what we were talking about, I think, last time when we did the bite-sized, is that what happened was Phil Spencer and company with Game Pass flew too close to the sun with the ABK merger. They picked up Activision Blizzard King for the first time in Xbox's history. Their service was more profitable and than the flagship UI. Like, Game Pass and Xbox, not Game Pass, Xbox made more money last year or on one of the quarterly reports than Windows did. and I think we need, like, that's important, because if you pay any attention to the industry at all during the earnings calls, like, Xbox would get mentioned like 2 or 3 items from the end. Like, it was almost, it was an afterthought. Like, and I'm not trying to be dismissive. I'm not trying to be ugly. I'm not trying to be petty.
No, yeah. That's just in relative to big operating system. Like, that's where you're at.
And I think what happened is you get something like Call of Duty, you get the studios from Activision, Blizzard, and King in there. You get the Candy Crush money sort of like pumping into this thing. You've got all of this stuff going, and all of a sudden it goes from, like, I think they are the third biggest, or they might be the biggest publisher right now. Like, just as far as having studios.
Right. Yeah. Phil Spencer had some like note, I forget, somewhere where he was like, we're one of the biggest publishers on Sony and Nintendo platforms.
They're one of the biggest publishers, period.
Right.
Not like, and it's like, and they bought that, when they bought ABK, that was a massive jump. That was orders of magnitude bigger than anything. And I keep using that phrase, but that was significantly bigger than any sort of impactor that they had. Okay. So, and we also need to understand that, like, things like Minecraft is a Microsoft property, and that's huge. That's on every platform, current iterations. But then you had these, like, Sea of Thieves debuted, and it was, I think, in the top. It might have been the best-selling game on PlayStation the month it released. It did extraordinarily well for them. So it's like he says these things, and it's like, well, duh, Phil, come on, like,
To piggyback like off that too, like, I think you're absolutely right. And we have a kind of a semi part 2 spinoff episode coming next after this one. But I think, like, it's a big shift that happened from, like, Microsoft emphasizing being a service provider, and now I feel like Microsoft's biggest push is now they're a publisher. And with this change, like, that priority of Game Pass just kind of like got bumped down the list a few notches.
Yeah. Well, and I think there's a very sort of real likelihood that, and I don't want to sound like I'm not trying to scare or dishearten anybody in the Xbox camp, right? But I think there's a very real likelihood that Microsoft is just probably going to de-emphasize Xbox as a brand until they can just sort of wash their hands of the whole thing, rebrand it as Microsoft Gaming or whatever. Yeah. And, like, there will probably be an iteration of Game Pass because it kind of works for them. But I also think they're going to sort of like listen, and where I was going with all the numbers is that they dumped $70 billion into this acquisition, and that's just the price tag to get to buy the companies, right? That's not including legal fees. That's not including like all of the transportation to fly them out to these different hearings and all this. That's not including any of that other stuff. So, and I'm not saying that significant, but that probably there's probably additional costs on that. And I don't care how big you are, $70 billion is a lot of money to recoup. And if all of a sudden you've got this massive cash infusion, like I'm willing to bet that the people like Satya Nadella, and I think that's how you say his name, but like I'm willing to bet that like some of these investors are saying, hey, that's a whole lot of money and we need some of it back now. And we're going to start leveraging these things. It's like, okay. And that's the thing. Game Pass, when it was smaller and a little scrappier, it could afford to be a bit like they could lose money on it.
Yeah.
Like, and that was fine. It's not that thing anymore. And because it's not that thing anymore, like, and that's why we saw the $15 to, what was it, 18 or 17?
Yeah, well, 17 and then now 20.
And now 20. It's like, dude, like, yeah. And it's like, and Ultimate's where they've always wanted you. I mean, that's like, that's why it's got the full suite. It's like, listen, on Ultimate, I'm just going to tell you, as somebody who does not use the service with any frequency, Ultimate is where I will play.
Right. There's even an argument of like all the mess we talked about is just to like, I don't really know. I'll just Ultimate. Fine. Press that button. Yeah. That just confuse people to the highest choice.
That could be part of it. I mean, I tend to not, I tend to not buy into conspiracy theories because they're usually like very convoluted sort of answers where it's like, people are like, there's probably really simple answers. It's just, we don't like what they tell us, you know, to a lot of these things. It's one of those things where I wouldn't be surprised. And again, we're looking like, I'm not going to say it's happening next year or even 2 years or 3 years from now. But I would say within the foreseeable future, there's a very strong likelihood that like this current iteration of Game Pass, like, I mean, even like the pulling of like day one Game Pass or Microsoft titles from that console level, because that was included, like the day one Game Pass stuff. And now they're moving it to standard where it's like, we'll trickle them out after a little bit, which is, and it's just one of those things. And I don't know, man, like, you know, and it's, I don't want to get too, but it's like, I think there's a little bit of validity to, and again, it's a bit of a puff piece. And I think it's sort of like the FTC trying to save face after they just flubbed it on the, you know, but the FTC basically sort of said, we think this is a fairly serious problem in the fact that this is a degradation of the product. It's like, you know, when they had Phil, and you can go like, listen, most of that stuff, except, well, there's a good bit that's actually redacted for corporate and, you know, reasons and stuff. But a lot of that, it came out fairly open. Like there's a lot of stuff that we know about, that we did have access to. And there was a lot of kind of like, well, no, it's kind of like, well, of course we're not going to adjust the prices unnecessarily, et cetera. You know, there's a lot of that corporate speak where it's like, basically they're saying anything to get this deal done. And it's like anybody with half a brain is like, no, the minute they can like reasonably sort of like turn the knob up on this thing, they're going to get you.
Which, to be fair, that happened sooner than I expected. Like, looking back now, like, this makes sense. The timing of it is like Call of Duty 6 comes out and the price goes up a month before the Call of Duty 6. And like this, I should have seen this coming, but I didn't. I thought it would take a little longer.
I thought they would sort of like, and that's the thing is like, it's so funny because, and as somebody again who hangs out in Sony land, it's like it is kind of a lot more than not. It's been like the one I saw a tweet that basically like, let's count the ways that Microsoft steps on the rake again. Like it was like, it was like from Ryan McCaffrey or something like that, where it's like Microsoft has sort of just like repeatedly shot themselves in the foot several times in the last year with just some of this stuff. And it's like they're just, frankly, I don't have much goodwill towards them at all. But it seems like they're kind of like churning through like their goodwill. It's like, you were the best value in gaming, and in a way, Game Pass still is that thing. I'm going to tell you what, people, at $20 a month, Game Pass is still a heck of a deal.
Yeah.
Like, now, what I will say is that it depends on the use case. Because what I found, and like something I wanted to actually sort of just touch on, is I have had a subscription to PS Triple Plus for the last couple of years. And what I'm finding more and more is that my use cases for my console don't justify that subscription.
Yeah.
And so like, I'm going to be like the dude who's like picking up codes, and just when I want to use it, I'll drop a code in. Sort of like, but it's going to be that sort of like maintaining base level kind of stuff for me.
Yeah.
From here
like
on
it's, especially losing the day one thing on most tiers is like that. For one, that really sucks. And that's like, feels like a betrayal of the marketing even.
Feels bad.
Yeah. But like, if we shouldn't gloss over that, but glossing over that, like Game Pass, I don't think is the best deal in gaming anymore. Like I think it's still a deal. It's kind of like it went from being the offer you couldn't refuse to now just the offer that maybe makes sense for you at this time. If you're playing a game, beating a game once a weekend, like by all means, like $20 a month versus buying a game every week, like that makes total sense.
And just like as a use case scenario, like if you're a big COD person, 2 months of Game Pass Ultimate, like if you're going to play COD for a couple months and then dip out. You're and you'll have access to all the other stuff that's on that library. That is like, you're not paying full price.
Works for you. Yeah,
it still works. It's just the math is like, and here's kind of what I've been saying about Game Pass from almost like not its inception, because it had a really rocky start, and I was like, oh, this thing's never going to work. But when they really started getting momentum, right? It was like the best value in gaming, best value in gaming, best value in gaming. And I kept kind of like saying, maybe to a lot of people's annoyance, like, this seems too good to be true. It's probably too good to be true.
Yeah.
And I think that unfortunately, like, it's kind of one of those, like, I think I was right. I think the fact that it is so big now, you can't kind of obfuscate. And I think that's when, again, like Microsoft's bigger stuff kind of stepped in, and they're like, no, we're going to start making money on this thing. Like, yesterday.
I get a sense they did it to themselves by buying Activision and playing Call of Duty. Like
it's an Icarus moment. You flew too close to the sun, and now your wings are melting and you're plummeting to the ground.
Which at the same time, I actually think like Microsoft is going to be fine. Like,
Microsoft
puts them in a great spot. Yeah,
dude. Like it just, Xbox as a brand is going to. I'm not going to say it's not inevitable, right? It's not one of those things where it is like done, fine, like. But I mean, the cynic in me is like, I know there's this whole commitment to another generation. I wouldn't be that surprised if that got the kibosh. I mean, I was highly doubtful. I was highly doubtful that they were going to go another generation, especially with things like the deal with that Amazon Fire Stick thing. Like, I don't know. I don't like being this guy. I really don't. I mean, I kind of do, but mostly I don't.
It feels good when you're right, which unfortunately you kind of are this time. And
but it's like that. I feel bad about being right. It was fun to sort of like sit by, the sidelines and cackle and sort of like stick my finger in people's eye and like be like, you're not that smart. This isn't that good of a deal. This kind of sucks. Like, you're a sucker. And then when it's like, oh no, I feel really bad now. It's not that.
Yeah. It all just like, I'm bummed it went this way, but I think it was quicker than I would have thought.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest thing. I'm not surprised that the moves were made. I'm surprised that they happened this quickly.
Yeah.
But I did want to talk to you, and I think like the sort of and again, trying to keep this brief. I know we're oh man, this is going to be a beefy boy. Sorry, but that little bit of ray of sunshine with like they came out swinging, with that what the Keeley summer
game mess.
Summer games mess. That's a good one for. I've also
I can't take credit for that. So that's a Jeff Grubbism.
Okay, I've heard Summer Games fiasco.
That's good too.
But Microsoft's presentation there was really strong. And they got. I'll tell you what. Like a lot. I think there are a lot of people who think a lot of the games they showed are going to be day one on Game Pass. And a lot of their games are going to be day one on Game Pass.
Yeah.
But I think they showed something like 17 or 18 games or said something that they've got like 18 games coming to Game Pass on day one. And if you look at that lineup, 17 are self-published titles. So it's like they might have been, but I mean, they got the marketing for that Metaphor Refantasio, which, I'm Persona 3 Reloaded right now. And like, oh yes, another JRPG, massive, several hundred hours, sort of like, yes, hole in my head right now, just put it right there. But it was a really strong showing. It was a really good showing, and it was like I know that there's been like my buddy Micah. He was like he was not so hot on it. He's a little bit more of a Sony pony than I am even. But I still think there were some questions coming out of that. Frankly, I think the Indiana Jones trailer, I've kind of watched it, and I don't know if it's a streaming thing, but it did look a little like the game looks cool, and it's what's the studio? No, I'm blanking.
Oh, Machine Games.
Machine Games. So it's like they've got the pedigree, it's got the chops.
Yeah.
But there was like some just like model issues where I was like, this looks a little weird to me, but I don't know.
Actually, that looks great. I didn't notice that, but I'm also Indiana Jones fan, so I'm biased.
I mean, I'm probably gonna I'll be honest, I might check it out eventually on Game Pass Ultimate. But
there you go.
There you go. But it was and I'll tell you what, I really did like that, because I felt like Microsoft really did need a win. And I think that's the kind of win. It's easy optically, and
and like of one of the biggest criticism is like Microsoft has not been delivering like consistently good games. Like it's a good optimistic look, even if that feature is not necessarily tied into Game Pass. Like, I mean, Game Pass will exist. That's kind of clear.
Yeah.
But not in the premier way they always wanted it to be.
Yeah, I think, and I think that some of that criticism has been fair. Like, you look at like the reception to Hellblade, and it didn't even really manage to hit like critical darling, because it's like the reviews are like super split. You look at Starfield, which is, and again, these are things that are generally pretty positively received, but there's also some real big kind of like squishy bits where people are not happy. Especially Starfield in its original iteration. And so it's one of those things where Microsoft has had a problem for years now, but especially in the last couple of years, where it's like, oh, it's coming. And this stuff is like trickling out bits and bobs. And what was that one from Arcane?
Redfall.
That was disastrous. What I'm really hopeful for, though, too, is that this will finally be the year, and they can justify saying, like, hey, we get you have concerns about like the pricing and everything else, but here's why it's a value. Here's the value proposition. And I think so. I'm hopeful for Microsoft, and I just I don't know where I was going with that anymore.
No, that's fine. That's a good ending point. We'll we'll kind of continue that conversation in our next episode, which we'll stay tuned for that next week. That'll be a little treat for you. But we got to get to recording that now. So let's wrap up here. But Nate, as a final segment here, what are you playing? One name, one game.
I have 2 games that I've been like super hip deep in, and I'll go with, I have been playing a mess of Destiny 2, The Final Shape. It's so good. It is Bungie landed the impossible plane. This thing was like Destiny was kind of like a capsized burning, like capsized is like water, but it was a bad.
That's how bad it
thing.
was.
It was so bad, but they landed, and it's peak Bungie. It's so good. It's so good. So
nice. Do you have a second game?
I do. I'll save that for next one.
Perfect. There you go. Well, I've been playing a lot of Dave the Diver. Well, Nate, thanks for joining me. Thanks again for joining me. Where else are you out on the internet?
If you want to find me personally, Nate _McKeever on most of the platforms, and of course over and any of the socials for like the backlog breakdown, and in our Discord server. So
nice. Well, thank you all for listening in. You can follow us on the major podcasting services, and you can find us on the proper socials like Quick Play Pod. And let us know, what do you think of Xbox changes to Game Pass? And that's all the time we have for today. Thanks.